We're very happy that Kai Jonas was able to join us today. Kai is going to do the keynote speech for today, basically to set the scene for what we know about mental health and LGBTIQ individuals. Kai is, I'm actually, are you Dutch, Kai? No, you're not Dutch, but he's working in the Netherlands. He's a professor in social psychology in Maastricht University, also a professor of social psychology at the University in Hong Kong. He's the chairperson of the European Association of Social Psychology, and he's been working internationally on a lot of projects to do with LGBTI mental health. And Kai is going to give us a presentation on, what's the title? It's going to be LGBT, it's mental health, the good, the bad, the good, and the future. I'll mute myself. Kai, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Paul, for the invitation. Thank you, everyone at ShareNet, and of course, the broad audience that is here. Hello to all around the world, and I've seen some familiar faces, some familiar names. So great that you're here. I want to talk briefly today about LGBTQI plus mental health, and I'm pretty sure that all of you in one form, shape, or another actually do know much more about specific communities, about specific environments than I do. And I think that's the beauty of such a meeting that we have today, that we can all sort of share our knowledge and enrich and embrace each other. What I would like to do, as I put into the title, is I got out my crystal ball, and I also want to look a little bit into the future so that you can prove me wrong in a number of years. But before I get there, I would like to start with what I put in the title, the bad. And actually, that is something I want to keep rather short, because we do already know quite a lot about what is the bad. But before I go there, I don't know, Hannah, you wanted to ask this question, so maybe that's a good moment to put this up, because that's related to to my first part. So if you would now vote how much more likely it is that sexual minorities are to suffer from psychopathologies, mental health, compared to heterosexuals. And there are 3 options up. It's sort of a little bit like the voting, but we don't have to wait that long as for Arizona and Pennsylvania. And no one's going to sue against the results. I think the voting is over. I don't see any more answers coming in. And the majority of you voted for 5 to 10 times more likely that sexual minority members are suffering. Do I have to click on finishing the quest? Yeah, maybe I'll do that. Maybe, I don't know, Hannah, you need to take over. Then we have a clear winner, and that is 5 to 10 times more. And I'll reveal in a second if that's actually what we do see in science. Now, I need to end this, and I need to move away. Now, the bad. How bad is it? Is it actually 5 to 10 times, or is it less? And maybe I need to reveal it right away. It's actually not that bad. Of course, the odds ratio is there, and it's against us. And this is the data that I drew from the meta-analysis of Ross et al. From 2018. So if you want to read up on it, this is where I got this number from. This doesn't say that there are outliers that are worse off, outlier groups that are suffering more, that have a higher likelihood. But on average, this is what we do find. And it's actually on a slightly downward movement, in the sense that the disparities are getting smaller, which is good news overall. What we could also see in the Mentimeter survey is that a lot of you think about depression, anxiety, and suicide, ideation, and attempts. These are sort of the classical 3 foci that we often take into account when we talk about mental health. But what I would like to also stress in the context of this this talk is that we need to really broaden our focus, and that we need to look beyond depression, anxiety, because there is so much more that can play a role in the context of mental health and positive or bad mental health. Part of the bad is what we often see as predictors is the experience of minority stress. And Ilan Meyer has written a seminal paper. There's a current debate also going on if actually minority stress and internalized homonegativity is the best predictor, or should we use different concepts like rejection sensitivity. And there is, of course, a third big player that has an impact on mental health, and that is the experience of interpersonal and structural stigma. So these are sort of the classics, if you want to say. We focus on specific types of outcomes. We assess a number of predictors, and what you see if you look at the literature is a proliferation of actually these types of dependent variables and these types of predictors that are now sort of assessed for a number of communities around the world. This is actually good because our data for now is often stemming from Global North gay males or MSM, and there is really a lack of data from Global South communities and communities that are not gay men. So in the sense, it is good that we run these investigations, these studies in new contexts, but we also need to move ahead, and that's what I want to look into the future a little bit. Since suicide ideation and attempts is such a prominent topic, I would like to zoom in a little bit on that topic and sort of do a shout out to my colleagues. I've worked in, now that was a little bit too fast, in Bangkok, the group around Thomas Guadamus, where we investigated the interaction between mental health, their social media and social network use, and sexual behavior. And I just wanted to point to this because I find it important to understand that it's not only sort of our classic predictors that can lead to a decrease in mental health and, in the worst case, a risk of suicide and suicide ideation, but that it is also related to behaviors that we show as members of such communities. And what is interesting here is that if you had your sexual debut earlier, if you engage in group sex, if you seek partners online, and if you're also having quite a robust HIV risk, that this is associated with, correlated with a risk of suicide for young MSM in Thailand. And it's often something that we overlook, that we think like our everyday sexual behavior is nothing that we should be worrying about. And it is actually the case. We need to look into this. I'm not saying we should stop having sex, and I'm not saying we shouldn't look for sex partners online. That's not the message. But the message is we need to understand that our everyday behaviors that are very, very prominently or prevalent in LGBTQI communities also contribute to our mental health. And that could be a story that we could continue for a while, and I'll come back to that. But given that I don't have an abundance of time, let me move on, and I wanted to move to the good as well. And then this is sort of the next slide. What do we have to say about the good? And here, it's oftentimes really difficult to find evidence for that, because good results are much harder to publish than bad results. And hence, a lot of findings that show that it's not all bad are really hard to obtain. Now, let me just click to my next slide. I have some problems with this. Here we are. What we do actually see, and I call that a ray of sunlight, is that some subgroups are actually really doing quite well. And this is really a challenge for us as researchers, but also as practitioners in the communities, to determine who are the ones that need our attention, and also who are the ones that are that we can sort of leave a little bit outside of the focus. And that is often correlated with higher SES or an urban place of residence. But we also see that community mental health and well-being support, either online or offline, is really helping. So we see that there are certain groups, oftentimes the well-off, are suffering from less issues of mental health, but we also see that our interventions are really helping on a small scale level. And often these are low-hanging fruits, they are cheap. And I pulled up this the study about social support networks for young adults. And this is also including, for example, Latino LGBT youth in the United States. Of course, family acceptance is the biggest player, and it would be weird if it weren't. But we also do see that friend support, that some community support has a positive influence on self-esteem and LGBT esteem. And these are sort of precursors that make us protected, that give us a layer of resilience and prevent the deterioration of mental health. So I would say there is a ray of sunlight, and I also would like to add another one to it. This is own research that I've been conducting in the Netherlands with my Amsterdam Pink Panel group. It's a collaboration between the COC Amsterdam, an LGBT activist group, and the University of Amsterdam. And I would call that not lonely at all. We often assume that LGBTQI are suffering from loneliness. And that may be the case, and that's actually what we thought initially as well. So in the sample, we investigated what are the indicators for loneliness. And you can read out these indicators, and I'll share my slides later on with Hannah and Paul, and they can share them in the group. So we assessed 22 loneliness indicators, and that was actually the next question I wanted to ask, like, how many indicators do you think are prevalent in the group? And you would assume that on average, yes, they are at very high risk to be lonely. They have 13 out of 22 indicators present overall. Now we investigated with that kind of problematic result. Are there differences between people living with HIV and people that are HIV negative? No, there aren't, which is in a way good news. We see that transgender individuals show the highest prevalence, and gay men are the lowest. And then you could see, like, oops, that is not going in the right direction. Well, it is not that bad after all, because if we compare it against the general Amsterdam population, all of the subgroups that we investigate showed lower levels of perceived loneliness. So in fact, if you are a heterosexual male with a migrant background living in Amsterdam New West, and the locals will know where and what that is, you have a much higher likelihood of experiencing loneliness compared to any of the LGBTQI groups that we investigated. So it's not always as bad as we think, and there are other groups in the general population that fare worse than we do. Now, after some rays of sunlight and not being so lonely at all, I would like to move to the future and try to focus on a number of aspects that I see as potentially threatening mental health of LGBTQI, and that we focus on and in our research and also in our interventions. There is an abundance of, there's some research in the United States, fairly recent, that shows that depression and suicidal ideation have surpassed HIV as a burden of disease for sexual minority men. And I think that's a very interesting indicator that sort of the HIV burden is becoming lower, or can become lower, for affected communities, and that mental health issues take over. And maybe let's say they're sort of the trailblazers, but it's really something we need to keep in mind and see if, as much progress as we make in HIV prevention and therapy, that it's not going to be done and good, but that mental health can take their place as a burden. We also need to look into specific threats as conversion therapy that are becoming more and more prevalent around the world as a number of conservative groups and faith-based groups are promoting this. And we also need to look at the increase of substance use worldwide, and that can either be an outcome of poor mental health and exacerbate the state, or mental health can be a determinant for substance use, and it will be very difficult to disentangle the causality. So most likely it's going to be in both directions. And also, but I'm not going to talk about that today because that is going to be an own topic, and it needs to bring people from the biomedical and field in. We really need to look at the biomarkers of mental health. We do see that chronic inflammation and microbiome disbalance have an impact on our mental health. And that's really a fascinating avenue for research, but also for interventions. But that's something for the future. Now, let me dive into the context of conversion therapy. This is research conducted in the United States, just came out in Journal of Homosexuality. And it is no big surprise that the mental health goes down for parent-initiated conversion therapy and for parent-initiated conversion therapy with external helpers. And these are really having serious impact on mental health. It doesn't, interestingly, so much have an impact on substance use and not so much on sexual risk behavior. It does have an impact, especially when the external effort is coming in on the socioeconomic status. So this is really something we need to look at, because it will be a tough fight on the policy and then the activist level to counter these conversion therapy approaches that can have very detrimental effects for the individuals that are subjected to this. And these are often not voluntarily engagements. My second part that I wanted to talk about is the substance abuse, the substance use among MSM. And I was very happy that my friends at Pulse Clinic in Bangkok shared some data with me that they also just presented at the APACC meeting in Bangkok not so long ago, or virtually not so long ago. And here actually comes my third and last question I could pose to the audience. Namely, what do you think are the most used drugs in these three regions, namely Thailand, Malaysia, and Hong Kong? Most likely all of you, if I may answer the question for you, would say crystal meth is at number one. And that is actually the case for Thailand. But then it is really interesting to see how the substances that are being used are differing. So this is sort of the ranking for Thailand. Again, crystal meth in Malaysia is top, but you do see slight differences, and Hong Kong is most different, and that is really fascinating. It has to do with local availability, but it also means that we need to look at the substance use and also the harm reduction and interventions differently. The amount of substance use among the population is high, almost half in Thailand and a robust 25 or 35% in the other two regions, and it's growing all over the world. Every survey cross-sectionally that we are running at the moment shows a stark increase in substance use. Now, what does that mean? This is data from the group of John DeWitt from Australia, and yeah, you do see that a lot of the predictors that I talked about, stigma, internalized homophobia, and so forth, lead to psychological distress. That is the first column, to suicidal thoughts, to suicidal attempt, also to drinking, but not that strongly. And it's also linked to club drug use. And this is where we have to really investigate this triangulation of the effects or the determinants of stigma, of experience, of discrimination, the coping strategies that are often used by substance users to curb these effects, and the potential spiral downwards on mental health. I wanted to also bring up some qualitative research, because I also believe that this is an avenue that we need to pursue more, narrative approaches, storytelling where large-scale surveys aren't possible. And this respondent here in this paper from Matthew Mimiaga talks about that the chemsex use, the substance use, is really alleviating the burden of HIV. It pushes it into the background. It makes it less of an issue and gives you a sort of a freedom from it. Furthermore, the mental health consequences are really a problem. We do see that users of especially crystal meth experience chronic depression, anxiety, especially after crystal meth use. And this can just exacerbate and become stronger and stronger until they become cases for acute psychiatry. And my oftentimes very confrontational statement for these users is, you know, your HIV infection can be turned into a chronic state, and that can be managed. But your psychological health, your mental health, is not something that we can manage that easily with a pill. That's going to be going downhill. That's going to be a much bigger burden for you. So keep that in mind. Having said that, I want to slowly come to an end. What do we miss? And I already started that in the beginning. I think we really need to change our focus. At the moment, if you look at the summary papers, the meta-analysis, the research synthesis, the majority of the research is currently being done with Global North MSM and predominantly coming from the United States. And I think we really need to work hard on the inclusion of Global South data, where mental health is often not the primary focus yet. When I talk to my colleagues in Sub-Saharan Africa, but also in Southeast Asia, they say, like, yeah, Kai, that's really nice, but we're having to deal with the HIV infection and everything related to that first, and then we can talk about mental health. But still, we need to see the linkage and not keep it out of the focus. And also, and this is, I left the G out of the abbreviation here on purpose, we need to include more lesbian, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex individuals in this research. This is often limited or hindered by low numbers, and I'm struggling with this myself. I will always, with much love, try to present results on these communities, and it just doesn't, or it's not possible because we can't do a lot with fairly low numbers. And I think that's what I mentioned before. We also need to understand that narrative accounts, qualitative research, storytelling can be a very good first start to bring the topic to life and to attention, because these accounts are often much richer than just a mean or an odds ratio in quantitative research. Also, we need to focus on conditions other than depression, suicide, and anxiety. They're important, no question, no doubt, but we also need to understand how this affects relational well-being, how we can actually create supportive and healthy relationships for LGBTQI individuals, so that we're using these as resources and as a social context to fall back on, rather than a battleground and something that creates more stress. We also need to focus on body dysmorphic perception disorders. Social media, especially again for young gay males, but also for trans individuals, is setting often completely unrealistic standards that have very detrimental effects on mental health. If you think you're not belong, you aren't worth enough because your body is not fitting a specific ideal, then this has serious effects on especially young LGBTQI. So broaden the focus, include other communities, and use different approaches that we usually haven't used in this large-scale cross-sectional or longitudinal research. So this would be my hopefully last slide. I want to thank you. If you have any questions, we can discuss them right now, and don't take your mental health for granted. And if you have any other questions, reach out on social media or send me an email. I'm around and I'm usually rather quick to reply. Thank you very much.
That's wonderful, Kai. Thank you so much for setting the scene. And I already noted that you gave wonderful suggestions to the master students, because there's a lot of research topics that you raised in your presentation. Before we go to the next session, if there is one or two urgent questions, unmute yourself and go for it. No, then as Kai said, if you have a particular question for Kai, you can use the chat function for that. You can send him an email, or if it's a question on the basis of the presentation of Kai that you would like to discuss either in the group work or later in the plenary, please put it on the chat box and then we will take note of it and we might get back to it later. Okay, great. So let's start the recording again with sort of the overview from Kai and the sort of the very powerful personal testimonies that we've heard after that. We come to the next part of this afternoon, and that is essentially the presentation by three ex-master students. And this is particularly interesting because we were hoping that with today we would, because we know we have a lot of master students present. So we really hope that the presentations that we are going to present now are not only going to enlighten us more about the issues related to mental health of LGBT individuals, but also give people the confidence and the energy and the curiosity to maybe apply that to their own research that's coming up. The first who is going to present is Jessica Musler. Jessica did her master's last year at the University of Amsterdam in medical anthropology and sociology. She graduated recently, and the topic, very interesting topic that she chose for her master thesis was the well-being of queer migrants. And she did her research in Berlin, in Germany. So the floor, Jessica, is yours. And I know that you're going to start with a question as well.
So the first question is, what are several challenges to well-being that queer migrants in Berlin navigate?
Are you managing the poll?
People are still answering, but I think we can go ahead.
Okay. The answer will be revealed in the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. So a little about the inspiration. Yeah, can you see it? Okay. So a little bit about the inspiration for this project. So when I started my master's program, I was interested in queer studies and also in migration studies. And I noticed that there was not a lot of literature specifically looking at like the intersection of those fields. So kind of like queer people who migrate because of reasons related to their gender or sexuality for more freedom. And I was kind of personally interested in this topic because I also identify as a queer bisexual woman, and I come from a relatively conservative background. So I know from personal experience that it's quite common for queer people to migrate to environments where they feel like they have more access to sexual freedom, which I didn't have as much of in the conservative Texas environment that I was born in. So I was interested in kind of studying people who move to other countries for more sexual and gender expression and their well-being, their psychological and psychosocial well-being. I chose Berlin as the region because Berlin is known for being a popular destination for queer migrants, and it has a long history of countercultural movements and an alternative culture that's brought a lot of queer people to the city over time. So then the next slide is a little bit about the theory and methodology that I used for this study. So this was like an ethnographic research study. For the theoretical framework, I kind of took an approach that combined multiple different frameworks and concepts. The first theory that I used and that was most prominent in this study is social navigation. So navigation kind of implies movement within a medium that is wavering or unsettled. And social navigation provides a lens to view intersections of structure and agency. And it allows us to consider how queer migrants act and move through shifting environments, navigating challenges that they face, and navigating challenges to mental health. Another framework I used that came up more implicitly than explicitly in the study was intersectionality. And intersectionality considers various identities such as sexuality, gender, race, migration status, and how these different identities can intersect to produce unique circumstances for individuals. And I was interested kind of those intersections on mental health and mental health seeking behavior. Liminality is the final part of the framework that kind of describes the state of moving from one status or role to another. And it can be used to describe migrants moving countries. It can also be used to describe the experiences of queer people who experience marginalization from society. And then for the research methodology, I used a combination of participant observation and semi-structured interviews. So the participant observation was conducted both in person and online. Because of COVID, which occurred during the middle of the field work, a lot of the physical spaces where I was working with people like bars and social meetups moved online. So I ended up joining a lot of online groups and following people there instead. I also used semi-structured interviews, mostly with people that I found through Facebook connections. And these interviews were mostly conducted in person, but then after COVID, I also conducted many interviews through Skype. Okay, so for the research findings, I'm first going to talk a little bit about the challenges to psychosocial well-being that were discussed. And then later, I'll talk about the ways that people navigated those challenges. So one of the first challenges that came up in many different interviews was related to heavy substance use in the queer scene in Berlin. So one participant described her experience, saying that she had struggled in the past with depression and anxiety and was able to manage that through a lot of abstinence from drugs. But it was difficult for her to connect with her friends in Berlin because it was very rare to find a queer social space where she could connect with other queer people while still staying sober and not being tempted by drugs. And this was also reiterated by several other participants in the study. So there's a long history of substance use being associated with queer culture, particularly for gay men, but this study also noted that substance use was common among queer women, trans, and non-binary people as well. Substance use can kind of be seen as a means of coping with circumstances that someone is unhappy with, as a means of coping with mental health problems, or as a rebellion against kind of an oppressive mainstream society. And something I noticed in the research was that while in Germany and in many Western countries, same-sex marriage and adoption is legalized, and in some ways in recent years, it seems like there's been a lot of progress for queer people. Many queer people still find that they lack full social acceptance, and especially people with trans, non-binary identities, and also with people in non-monogamous kinds of relationships, find that it's difficult to attain full societal acceptance. And this lack of full societal acceptance can be seen through the framework of stigma. And stigma has a very strong impact on mental health. It's important to note also in this study that stigma for queer migrants can occur for both their queer identity and also for their migrant identity. And so this can kind of compound the effects of that stigma. Okay. So other challenges to well-being people navigated included loneliness and feelings of being kind of between worlds. One participant described they feeling a kind of in-betweenness as a result of being bisexual and also as a result of having a migration background. And this was reiterated by many other participants as well, that there was an intense feeling of loneliness and being in a new cultural environment, navigating that environment, and also being queer and having to manage the stigma and the discrimination associated with that. So Xenia, who is the participant mentioned here, came from a former Yugoslavian background. Her parents were former Yugoslavian and she was born in Germany. And she described how she struggled to connect both in her parents' Eastern European communities and also in the German queer scene. While she felt that she could express her sexuality more among her German friends, she found that there was a part of her heritage that they didn't fully understand. And so this led her to feel lonely. She also described how being bisexual often led to feelings of loneliness because she felt marginalized both by the mainstream culture and by some parts of the queer scene. She described an experience where she was discriminated against while working at a queer magazine for not being queer enough because she was bisexual and not a lesbian. But at the same time, she felt that she didn't fully fit in with her straight friends either. So she had this feeling of kind of in-betweenness and feeling like she wasn't queer enough for the queer scene and also wasn't straight enough for her straight friends and the mainstream society. So this slide is talking about how the challenges were navigated through different methods. So first we're going to talk about digital media and then also about alternative kinship structures. So digital media was a very common way in this study that queer people talked about navigating challenges. So Daisy, who discussed earlier about how she had trouble finding sober connections, was able to use Facebook and meetup groups specifically to search for queer sober groups of queer people who met and went to events together, but decided to stay sober and support each other in staying sober. And she was able to find a lot of strong connections using digital media tools like Facebook. I also noticed through observations that Facebook groups were used as a way of exchanging resources and information between queer people. Everything from people asking, where can I find a trans-friendly gynecologist, or people looking for housing support, safe housing environments that they could find queer-friendly roommates and so on. Also, Twitter and blogs were a common way for people to discuss and search for kind of a sense of community. One participant, Xenia, who talked about how she struggled to find a sense of connection with both her Eastern European family and with her queer German friends, ended up using Twitter and blogs to talk about her migration experiences and her challenges. And through posting on Twitter and sharing her experience, a group of queer Eastern European migrants actually reached out to her and asked if she wanted to join them and start kind of like a discussion community. And so through this kind of online posting, she ended up finding a support group where she felt a lot less lonely because she was able to connect over shared experiences.
Jessica, I'm just interrupting because,
yeah?
because you're running a little bit over time. So
I'm sorry. This is just the last one. Okay, so just really quick, then alternative kinship structures were also used. And this is basically kinship structures outside of like biological family, people supporting each other through kind of friendships and very close connections. One participant talked about how she made a connection with two lesbian women who basically became like her moms because she didn't have a connection to her own family, and how this kind of support structure provided her with the emotional support she needed to manage her well-being and mental health challenges. So in conclusion, challenges to queer mental health among queer migrants in Berlin included substance use, stigma, the challenges of navigating a new cultural environment and loneliness, and then resilience was enacted through social connection, digital media, and alternative kinship structures. Okay, that's all. Sorry for running long. That's
wonderful, Jessica. I didn't know you were already on your last slide, otherwise I would have kept quiet. Okay, we're not going to take questions for Jessica. We'll just leave the questions that anybody might have to be posed in the breakout group that Jessica is running in a little while. We're just going to move straight on to Lazarus. Lazarus Kontosopoulos, difficult name, wonderful topic. Lazarus also graduated last year at the University of Amsterdam in medical anthropology and sociology. Before that, he actually did a degree in clinical psychology, also from in the Netherlands, from the University of Leiden. And at the moment, he is actually a researcher at the Amsterdam Institute for Global Health and Development. So a very interesting perspective. The research he did last year was on mental stress, resilience, and mundane mental health practices for MSM in Paramaribo, the capital of Suriname. So, Les, the floor is yours.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me properly. And you can already see the question popping on your screens. It would be, what do you think Suriname scored on a recent global scale of LGBT social acceptance? And by social acceptance here, that scale specifically refers to both having access to rights, but incidents of discrimination and violence and every aspect of potential social exclusion. So I see some results coming in. I'll give it half a minute more or something. And there are various, I see already that it's quite spread, the results. There's not really a clear winner, so to speak, which is interesting. 45 of you have answered, so I'm just going to leave it there. And most of you say that it's around 3 out of 10. So 26% of you said that, which is interesting. And I am going to talk about that in a little bit in my presentation. Let me share my screen with you. Yes, you can see it, right? I hope. Yes, perfect. Yeah, so as Paul said, my topic is describing mundane mental health practices regarding men who have sex with men in Paramaribo, Suriname. And then I focused on mental distress, resilience, and social navigation. I do want to talk a little bit about Suriname because not a lot of people know about it as a country. Before I moved to the Netherlands, I also didn't know much about it. So I think it will be a bit helpful if I set the scene, so to speak. Suriname is the smallest country in South America. Its population is a little bit over 500,000, which is very interesting because this is it is already approximately 30 times smaller than the Netherlands, its population, but then its size is 3 times bigger, just to give you an idea of how not very populated it is. The capital city is Paramaribo. Of the official language is Dutch, which I speak, so my research was in Dutch there, but the lingua franca is Sanantongo, which is a local language, a Creole language, which I did not speak, but thankfully in Paramaribo, most people spoke Dutch as well, so I could conduct my research in Dutch. I think Suriname has a very interesting history, a history of colonialism and colonialism that has transitioned now to post-colonialism. And that is something that you see very clearly in the Surinamese society, I would say. And I think that is also interesting to mention that because I think colonialism is, speaking in terms of global health, that is something that should probably be addressed very often, even when it comes to mental health and LGBT rights. The next point is about the very diverse, the multi-ethnic and multi-religious identity that Suriname has. It's just from my research, I think I had participants from over 6 different ethnic backgrounds and 8 religious backgrounds, which already is, to me at least, it was very interesting. That was also one of the basic reasons I chose Suriname. Something else that needs to be mentioned is regarding the fact that it has both a Caribbean and a South American culture and identity as well. Therefore, what you see very often is that in Suriname, you can encounter Western ideas about a lot of things that are brought from colonial times and the ties that Suriname still has with the Netherlands. But at the same time, there are very local, context-bounded notions that are part of the Caribbean mentality in a lot of sense. And that is that has also to do with mental health and heteronormativity, which brings me to the next, my next slide. So in Suriname, heteronormativity is the dominant system, so to speak. And then there's this very interesting paradox that I encountered, which I also read about in the literature, that a paradox of coexistence of relative tolerance, while at the same time the existence of continuous homophobic incidents. So what I found particularly interesting is that Suriname scores the lowest in terms of physical violence against sexual minorities across all Caribbean countries, while at the same time there are still a lot of non-physical discrimination incidents taking place. And the other very interesting thing for me, because as Kai mentioned before, most research on sexual minorities is actually done on gay men. Well, that is not the case for Suriname. There's actually a lot of research done on Mati, which is a community of women that they have sex with each other, but they also support each other emotionally and financially. There is extended research done on that by Gloria Wecker, if someone wants. Again, for more questions, you can ask that on the breakout room. I can give you specific literature suggestions and ideas, but there's a lot of research done on Mati, and there's almost no mention at all of male sexuality, and especially male same-sex attraction, which I found very interesting. At the same time, there's another taboo, so to speak, and that is related to mental health. Generally in Suriname, there is a good manifestation of that is that for the whole country, there's only one psychiatric hospital, as they call it, but at the same time, it is viewed as something that only severely mentally ill individuals should attend, and there's an extreme stigma and taboo around it. And there, mostly Western interventions take place, whereas a lot of research has indicated that in Suriname, medical pluralism and holistic Afro-Surinamese models are the ones that they are often in the foreground when it comes to mental illness or mental issues. And that's why I realized that in a context where there is a double taboo, so to speak, both in terms of mental health and in terms of sexuality, and especially same-sex attraction, people should express themselves and these difficulties through mental distress in very mundane ways. So if they could not visit a psychologist, or if they could not even speak to their family, my question would be, how do they do that? How do they attempt to express themselves, to manage their distress, and how do they try to achieve resilience? And note a little bit of definitions, because I saw that this popped also in the chat before. It's difficult defining categories, identities, and all of that. And especially for my research, I had a whole section referring to these details. But for now, I'm just going to read this very fast, that by mundane mental health practices, I refer to any practices individuals may use in their routines, purposefully or not, in order to maintain or achieve mental well-being by coping with distress or boosting resilience. That may include traditional healing, which in Suriname was focusing more on herbal bathing and spiritual wristbands, social and relational elements, so talking to one's family or friends about one's distress, religiosity, so not just specific religions, but just the idea of believing, the idea of praying and attending mass and so forth, and other mundane behaviors and acts of care, like going for a walk or just talking with peers. And MSM in particular may use such everyday health practices since they're discreet, accepted, and carry no stigma. Yeah, that brings me to my research question. I think we might be running a bit low on time, so I'm not going to go into detail. I'm just going to mention my main one, which was, at the end of the day, how do men who have sex with men express distress and achieve resilience in Paramaribo? My theoretical framework is a little bit similar to Jessica's. I also use intersectionality since there are so many socioeconomic backgrounds and ethnic identities, religious identities. I thought of using intersectionality as a way to kind of bring together all of that and see how different identities and categories interact with each other. Idioms of distress and resilience is a little bit of a complicated theory, but we can talk about that in the breakout room again if you have questions more about that. And social navigation is also what Jessica already mentioned, I think, with Vi. My methods were both included both online and face-to-face recruitment. COVID-19 also affected very much my research and called for methodological changes. So I transitioned to a complete virtual ethnography. I was in Suriname for approximately a month, and then I got a little bit stranded in the Caribbean. Actually, on my way back, I lost all of my belongings for 7 months. I managed to get everything back in September. Again, more of that in the breakout rooms. If you have questions, if you need any tips on doing research during a pandemic, I'll do my best to help with that. The data collection occurred mostly via participant observation, informal interviews, so everyday interactions with people, kind of mapping the scene, so to speak, and semi-structured interviews. And I just very briefly, I want to mention that, of course, consent, anonymity, and minimizing harms for informants were very important because, again, considering that there's so much stigma, I thought it would be a good idea to anonymize everything, to ask for consent orally instead of writing, because then there's no proof that nobody could ever be exposed. And minimizing harm is not only physical and emotional, but it can be also social, right? We don't want to affect anyone's social relationships. My findings, well, first of all, as the so to speak, the front line, the primary support structures were the ones that included family, religion, significant others, and ethnic identity. What I found very interesting in the findings of the research was that what emerged at least was that there were double-edged sword-like relations. So very often one's family could function both as a source of distress and resilience. Religiosity also is very important, not religion itself. Therefore, as I said, I had participants across multiple religious backgrounds. However, I did not see any important differences regarding one's religion. But what was important was whether that individual actually was religious or not specifically which religion they followed or they practiced. And the example of coming out came up very often in my interviews with the informants. A lot of my informants brought up themselves their own sexual identity because they either introduce themselves as gay men or bisexual men, or as straight men that have sex also with men, or they decided that they do not want to use any label. I'd never asked them to use a label, but it came up naturally in the interviews. And by not assuming, so to speak, a gay identity, a gay man identity, that meant that they did not have to come out. If you identify as straight, or if you do not use any labels, you don't need to come out. So that is also kind of a flexible way for them to not directly come in a confrontation with their family or their religious beliefs. And that brings me to my next point, that of partial support from family and community. Therefore, if their behavior was not in direct, so to speak, confrontation with family values or community values, they could still use that as a source of resilience. They could still use that as a source of managing mental distress for everything that did not have to do with their sexual identity or their sexual practices. They could still depend on their family or their community, but for the rest, they would focus more on their vertrouwen, so their confidence, so to speak. It was usually cousins or brothers or peers, friends around the same age that they were able to support them, not judge them, and accept them. The example of forced coming out by Ishan, that is not his real name, I'm just using a name, is very interesting because Ishan went, very briefly I'm going to mention that, Ishan went to the doctor for a checkup, and his mother just happened to be there, and his checkup also had to do with his sexual practices, but then the doctor, since they were both from the same family, just forced them to go in the appointment together, not regarding any confidentiality or practices respecting personal space. So basically the doctor forced Ishan to come out in that setting, which had grave consequences for him. It ended up with him having actually a better relationship with his mother, but for a long time it was an impediment, and it definitely changed the dynamics in his family. When all of that,
Lazarus, just interrupting here, you're almost done with your time. So
okay, then very briefly, I'm going to mention that other mundane mental health practices are pluralistic practices. So sports, working out, routine and structure, staying active, praying, fasting. Ishan did that as well. Day trips, time alone, and or treating mental illness as a physical illness. So that just if you break your arm, you need to be laying on bed. What all the practices mentioned above have in common, sorry, is the fact that the informants remove, in a manner of speaking, themselves from the social context, either by turning to solitude, experiencing and treating mental distress as a physical illness, or simply by physically getting away from the social environment. I'm going full as fast as I can. This is the last slide. So the last thing that I would like to mention is regarding the social navigation that I mentioned before. So a lot of diets came up during my research. So what's the difference between being gay and doing gay? What's the difference between being fake and being real? So being true to oneself. A diet also was that of secrecy and pride. So it can be dangerous, it can be risky, hiding who you are, but at the same time, you can take pride. That brings me to visibility versus versatility. So one of my informants told me that he was bisexual, but he could never bring a man to his family as his partner. And he also told me that all that is hidden is not real to him. Therefore, whether you're visible or not has a direct link to the access you have to psychosocial resources and how much social change you can generate. And the thing that it needs to be told also is that Suriname, there is this live and let live mentality. And I can talk about an example of male and trans prostitution that I encountered in Paramaribo, but we don't have time for that, so I'm not going to do that now. We have the breakout rooms. That's about it. Then the summary of findings, I think I don't need to read it. I can make my slide available for everyone. I think, that was it in a nutshell, but again, I have more things available if anyone has questions.
Thank you so much, Lazarus. And I mean, you did make people curious to join you in the breakout room later by by leaving some of the findings for later, but that's great. So everybody who wants to know more about this presentation, make a mental note that you want to join Lazarus in his breakout room later. We go to the third presentation, and that's Linga Triutama, who did his master's at KIT a couple of years ago in 2017. He actually liked it in the Netherlands so much that he decided to come back to the Netherlands and is now actually working here in the Netherlands with an organization called Results in Health. He has joined the community of practice, which we're very happy about. And I will say this again, but we encourage all of you who are interested in this topic to join us in the community of practice. And Linga is going to present the research that he has done for his master's, which is quite a lengthy title. It's essentially exploring the determinants of the 4 major mental health issues in Indonesia amongst the LGBTI community, and also analyzing the interventions that might be available to actually deal with those mental health issues. I'm giving the floor to you, Linga.
Thank you, Paul. And so we start with the poll. Yeah, there you are. So the question before I present my thesis is, what is the most needed in mental health programs and intervention that target LGBTI people in Indonesia? What do you think is the most needed? Okay, we got some response. Yeah. Okay. We'll get the answer when I present my thesis, then I will end the polling now. Thank you. Most of you say that it's the second one, the data to support program design and planning. We'll see. Let me share my screen. So yeah, as Paul said that my thesis is in 2017, so it's quite years ago. So to be honest, I had to read it again last night to remind myself, and I feel like, what did I write? Shit, what I say? But yeah, I'll try to give my best to recall all of the memory when I work with this thesis with actually with Pam Batson, who's my supervisor. And as this is the background of the study, actually Kai already explained most of this, but I will highlight more in Indonesian context that during the process, the writing of the thesis in 2017, I think that was the time where Indonesian LGBTI faced elevated intolerance and violence, even from the government and from some official institutions. So it's quite a challenging time. And it also made me like, okay, this is the topic that I really want to work on. And then a personal issue, because in Indonesia I work for organization and LGBTI project and programs with HIVOS, and I myself, I identify myself as a gay, so it's more related that I want to work on issue that personally related to me and to my community. So I think, and as Paul also said, that the title is very broad. There's a reason also behind it, because from early study that I done, that I thought that there's not much data on mental health of LGBTI. So I, with my fully consciousness that this study is actually, I want to follow up this study to another studies that I will explain later on. So, and for these studies, I want the purpose of this study is to describe the 4 major mental health issue that also Kai also already mentioned, that these 4 mental health issue, or you know, the not only in LGBTI people actually, but in general population, that this is the major mental health issue that we face at the moment. And I also want to explore the determinants and to analyze the intervention programs, not in Indonesia, but elsewhere around the world, that addressing the mental health issue for LGBTI people, and how these intervention and programs can be applied in the context of Indonesia. And the methodology is literature review and the study, because of the limited of time and resources. It's for kids students, it's a bit a spoiler alert because you will have a very short time working on your thesis. So I remember that it almost 90% of the kids students at the time did a literature review and the study. It's only very small number of the students who do use data they are collected by themselves. So this is the framework, the conceptual framework that I adapted from LGBTI mental health promotion framework in Australia. And why I use this, because I think that I thought it is very comprehensive, not only focused on the determinants, but also tried to looking at the intervention that the level of intervention that can be used to address the issue. And for the literature review, I work with, let me check my notes. Yeah, as I expected, that very no studies from Indonesia that internationally published. So to make richer data of this study, I try to expand to like more other countries in Asia, also in Africa, that I thought have a more similar context with Indonesia, which is yeah, not easy. And again, it's also quite challenging to find data from Asia, and most of the time the data is only specific to sexual minority groups, like for lesbian, gay, and bisexual, but not for transgender and intersex people. So then I expand again my research methodology. So then I use data, of course, from the US and Europe, Australia, and Canada, just to see. I just want to try to compare how the situation in those countries and how the situation in Indonesia, and see how can it affect the mental health in Indonesia as well. But again, for transgender men and intersex, the data is very limited. So then I expand this search methodology again, use Google and use gray literature and also unpublished thesis or abstract from Indonesian universities. Okay, and this is the findings. One is the mental health issue. I think I will not go through these very details, but you can see that there's a real problem in LGBTI in Indonesia, that they are facing these problems. But again, as I mentioned, that no information found on transgender men and intersex people. I found one journal on transgender men is about violence, which is very interesting. But yeah, since my topic was in mental health, so I didn't really put it here. I think this is more interesting. I think the determinants. So I grouped my findings of the the data that I found that in Indonesia, I could only find data that related to the social connection, and it's only for lesbian and gay community, not to transgender and intersex. And from other Asian and African and Caribbean countries, the data is also limited, and not all determinants can be found during the research. And for the second findings is I try to see if there's already research on what are the determinants of a mental health for LGBTI people in Indonesia, and is the finding I could found at that time is from an organization is Arus Pelangi. It's a national foundation in Indonesia that conducted a research in 3 cities in Indonesia, showing that the social connection is indeed affected the mental health of LGBT, sorry, because they didn't work with intersex community. And there's also a finding from a thesis in Indonesia about the perceived social support that indeed affect the mental health of people in Indonesia. And the interesting thing is the sexual and gender identity concealment, because like for lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender, the coming out process is something that somehow to some extent will happen in their life, and it's a different finding from one study to another. One study said that people who conceal their sexual orientation will face more mental health problems, but another finding so the different thing. So yeah, it's very contextual, I should say. And then the second one is the access to social and economic resources. I want to share in Indonesia, like especially in transgender women in Indonesia, is about the identity card that you can use it to access everything actually, facilities from the government if you want to go to school, if you want to get a health insurance, if you want to get a job, you need an identity card. But since many transgender women in Indonesia, they are kicked out, or they just run away from their family because they are rejected. So but the consequence is they don't have the identity card anymore, so they cannot access those facilities, and most of them also didn't continue the study, very low education. So, and from Arus Pelangi studies that within lesbian, gay, and bisexuals, and 90% of them went to secondary school, but it's only 60%, 68% of transgender women who went to the secondary school. So we can see the gap of that, and compare if we see from the other countries that the education and employment was really affected the mental health status of this population. And
Linga,
the third,
you need to move on a little bit. Sorry.
oh, okay, yeah. And then for the third one, the freedom from violence and discrimination, this is also a different finding. There's the enacted discrimination and perceived between within the community. They have a different effect to their mental health as well. But yeah, I can share the thesis, because my thesis and thesis from kids students, I think they are open in the internet. And then the last one is physical well-being and mental health promoting behaviors. As this is also like the HIV status will somehow affect the mental health. But again, in some finding, this is not happening because in some community, for example, in gay and transgender women, maybe they are more aware or have more information about HIV and STI, so the level of mental health, the depression or anxiety may be lower. And this the last findings is I try to see some of this intervention. I group it to 5, and it is again, it's difficult to find a lesson learned or a best practice for intervention programs. Maybe it has something to do with Kai said before, that it is challenging to find a good a result. In bad news is always good, so maybe this is also the thing with this. Most of the findings I put here is based on a report, not in a academic research journal. So, but then again, I try to see the using this table that was developed by Buret. I think I try to identify which one is that can be applied in the context of Indonesia. But again, this is my personal judge, so I still have to go back to my community in Indonesia to see which one is really applicable in Indonesia. And for examples, like in the school-based gay straight alliance and school-based policies, which were very successful in the US and Canada. In Indonesia, it might be very challenging because in school, gay straight alliance, I don't think the parents will allow or the teacher will allow that kind of organization. Okay, the conclusion is it's lack information of mental health and LGBT people in Indonesia, and within the diverse of LGBTI groups. That's why that I put in the a chat what's LGBTI. Actually, I also have it in my thesis, so I just have to copy and paste it. There's a disparity within the diverse of LGBTI groups. Like for example, if you are a Black lesbian in a rural area in America, may face a different mental health problem. And then I saw that violence and discrimination play a more significant role. So I have one suggestion to adjust the framework, which I will show you in the next slide. And from the intervention program, the comprehensive one is it's always good, of course. It's shown by in the US and Canada, where the school based anti-bullying policy give because it's very comprehensive in school to address the not only bullying, discrimination, but also make LGBTI very protected or safe in their environment.
Linga, so is this the last one, or you have 1 more minute? Then
okay, 1 more minute. This is okay. This is the proposal that because of the violence and discrimination is more. You can see it have a more effect to LGBTI than to the general population. So I put it instead of next to the other, I put it above the other determinant to see how it play more role in these determinants. And yeah, come to the last slide. It's the we really need again the research that really this, as I said before, this research is very broad, and I really aware of that, and because I want just to pave the way for further research to be more deep and what really needed by LGBTI people in Indonesia. So I already started to talk with some organization in Indonesia to see the possibility to conduct this research, and what maybe we can discuss it more in the breakout room. Okay, for me, thank you. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih, Linga. Thank you so much. And the next session is that we can go into the breakout rooms. And as you remember, in the breakout rooms, we have an opportunity to talk with the researchers about the research that they have done, and maybe get some questions about the findings and also questions about the research process. And then I encourage everybody in the breakout room to together work on some findings related to what we can do in terms of practices, policy practices, or programmatic or intervention practices to make the life of LGBTI who are dealing with mental health issues better. That would be one. And we will get back to that in the plenary discussion. And the second one would be to identify maybe ideas for knowledge gaps that one of you may be addressing in your own research in the future. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a fruitful discussion in the breakout room. So that brings us to the final part of this afternoon. What we thought is to give each of the three breakout rooms about 5 minutes to share anything that they think that would be interesting to share with the plenary, and then we will have the last 5 minutes for maybe some burning questions, and if there aren't any, we actually have 2 questions again on the Mentimeter for you to answer. So how about Jessica's room first? Jessica, would you like to present?
Yes. So we went over different questions related to like the motivation for the research topic, how to define queer migrants, why ethnography was chosen to kind of focus on individual experiences as opposed to more statistical or broader approaches. We also talked about how COVID affected the study and how a lot of the research had to be moved online and some challenges that came with that in navigating like the ethics of Facebook, for instance. We also talked about alternative kinship structures, and we went a little bit deeper into those structures and how they're formed and how they could be valuable for future research as well on mental health. And then, yeah, that's the main points that we covered.
Were there any research gaps that you identified that you could recommend for current master students to pick up when they're going to choose their topics?
So I would say doing further research on how people can make social form those connections either through digital media or through alternative kinship structures would be interesting for future research.
And were there any ideas coming up about how a policy or services could respond to the needs of queer migrants?
We didn't talk as much about policy or services.
Okay, fine. Thanks a lot. So let's move to Lazarus then.
Yeah. Are you going to share the screen, Paul, or should I?
I don't know how to do that.
I can do it for you, Lars. No worries. Give me one second.
Hannah will do it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we spoke also about a little bit the sample size and limitation of the study. I see, unfortunately, that some of the questions actually are not visible now on Moodle for some reason, which is a pity. The ones with blue letters. But then we also spoke about methodological challenges and the pandemic and the phone calls, or challenges regarding language and how that affected interviews. In terms of knowledge gaps, we talked also about potential intersections between faith and religion and mental, in terms of accessing mental health, and how physical violence amongst sexual minorities is managed. I'm just giving you the headings now because also I can't repeat everything. We don't have time for that. I think Yusuf, if I remember correctly, then proposed the conceptual and action-oriented framework as a strategy that could decrease the risk of mental health problems. And then a question on this topic was also, did any of my respondents actually speak about intergenerational connection, it was about if basically older members of the said community could actually help newer members of the same community in almost in a way of mentoring them, and which in the case of Suriname was not really possible because of visibility and how people, if they're not out, they cannot help other people either. It's a community that is getting built right now. In the sense of community does not necessarily exist right now in Paramaribo.
Great. And just to add, because that one got lost because it wasn't on a sticky note, I mean, similar to intergenerational support, there was also a suggestion about family support for people.
That's right.
Remember?
That's right.
Great. That's great. Let's move to Linga's breakout room. Linga, can you present?
Yeah. It's already there. Okay. In my group, I should say, I spend too much time to answer the question. the first and two question. So yeah, especially about the context of Indonesia, because as a big country, we have of course one province to another are very different. Like in Aceh, if you know it Islamic Sharia law with in Jakarta and in Bali, it is very different. So to say Indonesia is not a single identity. So it's Indonesia itself. It's yeah, I have to be focused on which part of Indonesia that we are talking about, and also the question about how I didn't link the intervention with the determinants that I used, that I found in this research. But then again, it brought to a discussion that the table, the applicability of the intervention that I found from around the world, that I judge by myself that it is applicable for Indonesia, that actually that the thing that I will bring it to community, that I also share within the group, that's my intention to have another research with the community in Indonesia about this, and maybe we are now trying to narrow it down to be more focused on which one, which area that we really want to work on. And as in the group of Jessica, also interesting in the role of digital media, that to be honest, I didn't find it related to mental health issue. I didn't find any thing about digital media and supporting LGBTI or the negative effect of digital media. So that's one, the gap that will be very interesting to be explored, I think, especially during this time.
And in terms of strategies to help LGBT in Indonesia?
Yeah, we were just about to discuss it, but then we ran out of time. So, the safe house, the thing, yeah, we have it for transgender, but mostly for transgender women, because we saw it's more they are more vulnerable to be kicked out from their house, and they don't have a place to go. Not for gay and lesbian, I think they are more safe. So that can be one strategy, I think, that very useful. And also the thing I also found in other group as well, the family and community support. It is a very important thing. Yeah.
Okay, Great, that's great. It's really nice that there were some that was so productive in the breakout rooms, and I'm sure that in the report from this meeting we will actually sort of like share with you all the details of what came out. Now, instead of having a plenary discussion, we decided to use Mentimeter again for people to actually identify two things, like what is the key message they learned today in terms of knowledge gaps, and what is the key thing they learned today in terms of taking services and policies forward. Oh, it's coming up already, so that's great. So the first question, and you can just type it in, is like, which knowledge gap have you identified today? And this is really a question, I think, to the master students or the people who would have suggestions for the master students to pick up. So let's just take a minute to fill in this question. Go. And the number is the same again, right? Okay, so there's all these ideas coming up already. Alternative family support for migrants, lower middle income countries and situation and detailed data, policy and advocacy, mental health, the role of gay pride in supporting mental health. Mental health data in the global south, obviously, that came up, policy issues and support groups. Mental health issues affecting specific subpopulations within the broader alphabet community, and how can social media be used effectively to improve people's sense of connectedness? Very interesting one. And the knowledge of mental health status of communities in developing countries, same in the global south. Dearth of education material, lack of awareness level and support. Intervention for mental health, support for queer. Let me see, is this all new or is this still coming up? Policy issues create awareness. Most folks seem not to know. This is great. Oh, I can push enter to stop the scroll. No, I cannot. Mental health in Africa. That's a very important one. Anyway, so this is great. And we will definitely, thank you for your ideas. And we will definitely put this into the report. Now let's move on to the next question, Hannah. And the next question is how you in your work could address LGBT mental health or health more generally in your work or in your study. What's something that you take away from today that you could do differently? I only see one coming in. Listen to them, provide support, psychosocial support, and protect them from violence. That's to do with advocacy. On an individual level, be kind to all people. And include LGBTQ issues in mental health interventions. Strengthen a platform of professionals working on these issues. Don't taking mental health for granted. This is very much what Kai also said. Showing more support for people, advocacy, in influence a supportive policy environment, that's also advocacy. More data, get some ideas on how to focus my research project, particularly accepting the challenge of going all online and maybe even embracing digital tools. Yes, that's a very important one, especially in COVID times. And learning more about the mental health challenges and spreading awareness. Talk more openly, make it more visible and speakable. Be more health equity sensitive and professional towards LGBT. And motivate and educate others to accept and be kind in my community. That's great. That's a lot of things that people can do on a personal and professional level. And keep on bringing them in, and we'll definitely put them all. And don't discriminate comes on the top. There's somebody who is able to actually put text on all the slides, which is wonderful to see. It's a very important one. So just let's keep it there. Okay. I think this is wonderful. This is actually very rich. Before we close, I'm sorry to put you on the spot, Kai, but I'm actually quite interested to hear one or two observations that you might have from seeing the presentations and hearing the discussions.
No, I think the presentations are absolutely spot on, and I'm really happy and thrilled to see that especially the master students, the junior researchers, the next generations are focusing on aspects that have been overlooked or that are often overlooked now. And so we get a new wave of people that are working in the field, that are activists, that are researchers, that really point the finger on this is what we need to do, and this is what we need to investigate, and this is also what we need to find solutions for. And please, continue with that. Don't let yourself get curbed by the system, by dominant research streams. It's really important, and I can only encourage you to continue asking these questions and picking up on current changes. I didn't touch on the COVID situation in my talk. I'm really happy that it's coming up, and it's going to influence research that is being conducted now, and it's going to do that in a positive way. It's not a limitation, it's also a chance. And I think that a lot of things where we said before, oh, that's not going to work because it's online only or something like that, we have now proved that so many contexts of our society, of our communities have adapted, and that we can use them to our benefit. I'm not saying that everything's good and it's without a problem. In fact, I believe that we'll get sort of new challenges. The digital divide becomes a much more important element. But yeah, I think this is going in the right direction. And thank you, ShareNet, for creating this platform. Thanks for having all of you and contributing. Thanks for having me. And yeah, thumbs up.
Great, thank you so much, Kai. And I actually also would like to ask the same question to Pen, because you're like the brain mother of this event. Is this what did you pick out from what you've heard today?
I think it was wonderful. Also the different perspectives that people brought in, while at the same time hearing commonalities among it, and especially on the support structures, and that you can have a lot of different support in place, and that from sports, but also from these alternative kinship structures and so on. And I thought that was very inspiring. And also some of the issues that Kai brought up, he actually raised many issues that could be looked into and explored further. So I thought it was very inspiring for thinking through what else can be taken on, and how can we define better what do we mean with well-being, what are some of these trends that we're seeing with increased drug use amongst LGBTI, and what could be done to counteract. So I think there were very many very important issues raised that are very inspiring also to think through what else can be done. And it's really also, as Kai was saying, it's wonderful to see the new generation looking at these issues. That's also very inspiring. So that the issue is on the agenda, especially in in a world where there's also threats of where there's less space, but I think collectively, if we continue, and especially the younger generation continues working on these issues, we can also keep this on the agenda. So I really want to thank everyone for being so proactive, and through the wonderful presentations, the inspiring presentations, the fantastic facilitation of Paul and of Hannah. And so I think it was really, I'm very pleased with how it turned out. We were sitting in January to see what can we do this year. And I think, yeah, it turned out much better than I had hoped. So really great.
Great,
Thanks.
thank you so much, Pam. Well, you've already said all the thank yous, so let me just reiterate that, you know, thank you so much, presenters, for your presentations. Thank you so much, Pam and Linga, for thinking this through. Thank you so much, Hannah and Nicole, for sort of the logistical support, and thank you so much all the people who actually made time available to join us today. We really hope that you're going to sort of like let us know if you're going to do research on this topic. Be sure to let us know what you're choosing to do. And let me just finish with sort of like making a marketing call for the community of practice on LGBTI health, of which mental health is only a part. We are a group within ShareNet Netherlands, and we really would welcome many more people to join us and to talk about these important issues more at more platforms, and to come together and network about that. So thank you all very much. Look forward to a report from this interesting thematic meeting, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.